As a kid growing up in the late 90s and early 2000s, there wasn't a TV channel I watched more of than Cartoon Network. And for good reason. The shows during that era were incredible. There was Johnny Bravo, Ed, Edd n Eddy, Dexter's Laboratory, the Powerpuff Girls, just to name a few. But when people discuss Cartoon Network's rich back catalog, there's one show I never hear anybody mention. That being, Whatever Happened to Robot Jones. You remember, the cartoon about a robot that attends an American middle school to study human behavior? No? Well, I can't say that I blame you. The show only ran for 13 episodes and wasn't particularly popular when it was on. But I remember liking it when it aired, and it stuck in the back of my mind for years until just recently when I decided to sit down and give it a proper viewing. And now that I've watched the series in its entirety, not only do I believe it's underrated, I believe it to be one of Cartoon Network's best cartoons ever. And I know, that's a lofty claim to make, but there's so much to like about it, from the art direction to the characters and the comedy. The show at the very least deserves a second chance at gaining an audience. So, whether you've seen the show and completely forgot about it until now, or if you've only heard about it and are thinking about watching it for the first time, allow me to share what I believe makes Whatever Happened to Robot Jones the best Cartoon Network show you never saw. Whatever Happened to Robot Jones first appeared in the year 2000 as part of Cartoon Network's Voice Your Choice Weekend, a contest where a series of animated shorts would air, with the viewers voting on their favorites, and the winner being picked up and turned into a full show. And Whatever Happened to Robot Jones came in second, finishing behind Grim and Evil, which would later become two separate shows, The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy and Evil Con Carne. Both great shows, so no shame in losing there. Whatever Happened to Robot Jones was still selected to become a full show, however, and would be directed by its creator Greg Miller, who had previously worked on Dexter's Laboratory and, ironically enough, Grim and Evil. And after a year of production, Whatever Happened to Robot Jones finally premiered in 2002. Now, the first thing most people notice, and what initially drew me to the show, is its throwback art style. It's very reminiscent of the 70s educational series Schoolhouse Rock, from the way the characters are drawn with oversized eyes and mouths to show off their larger-than-life expressions, and in instances where characters have auditory reactions. Sometimes when they laugh or scream, words will appear on screen, giving an additional visual emphasis to the particular emotion. It's a fun way to accentuate characters' feelings that I'm surprised isn't used more frequently in other shows. One other interesting facet is the show's backgrounds. Not because they're dynamic, rather quite the opposite. They're drawn in a minimalistic fashion, and this is most obvious in the pilot episode where the backdrops not only have zero animation to them, but no color either, just pencil lines to give the impression of depth and shadow. It reminds me of Sergio Aragone's Mad Margin comics, the hilarious drawings in the blank spaces of the pages of Mad Magazine. The series would eventually get colored in, but they would still remain static, which I believe worked in the show's favor, drawing the viewer's eye towards any speaking or moving characters. And whether intentional or not, it's a neat little trick to direct focus, and it pays off in the show's more eventful scenes. One of my favorites being a recurring bit where Robot Jones becomes so stressed by a situation, he malfunctions, causing his body to contort and the backgrounds to completely change to different patterns and colors. It comes out of nowhere and is really pleasing on the eyes to see such a drastic departure from the usual look of the show. I've frequently found myself hoping for Robot Jones to overreact just so I could see what wildness the animation team could come up with for him. While the artistry is what brought me in, its characters and comedy are what kept me coming back for more. The show revolves around Robot Jones, a robot who is sent to middle school to study human behavior. And it would have been easy to write episodes as Robot Jones misunderstands a situation and his lack of knowledge results in him doing everything wrong, resulting in a reveal of what the actual intent was, and everyone having a big old laugh at this fish out of water. Instead, Robot Jones picks up on most situations fairly quickly, and the episode is usually him trying to solve mundane situations and what become increasingly more complicated solutions. For instance, in one episode, Robot Jones wants to seem more manly and mature when he sees Shannon, his love interest, fawning over a classmate who's grown body hair. So he decides he's going to use the metal shavings from a Woolly Willy toy to make it look like he has hair. I feel like most shows would make questioning the appeal of body hair the bulk of the episode, but it actually gets resolved fairly quickly, and it's able to go into a different direction with a really humorous ending. Robot Jones's character is able to work on two levels: being an adolescent child at a new school, often a confusing time in any young person's life, as they discover the workings of the internal and external world, and being a robot, which allows him to come up with what he imagines are logical solutions to overblown problems. And since he's constantly learning as he goes, he comes across as very empathetic. He even has no malice to him, so it's easy to feel happy for his successes, understanding his righteous indignation, and sad when he's taken advantage of. There's a scene when two kids pretend to be his friend, and later admit to him, in front of the entire school no less, that they were just using him and they'd never actually be friends with him. This leads to a truly heartbreaking scene where Robot Jones gets teary-eyed and says that making friends with humans was a failure and he'll never make the same mistake again. It's a very touching moment where you really feel for him and want him to ultimately succeed and be happy. And that's one thing the show does extremely well and consistently. All the characters are likable. Robot Jones's friends, Mitch, QB, and Socks, are written just like the group of friends you had when you were growing up. They laugh at Robot Jones when he does something embarrassing. They give him advice when he needs it. They're supportive. And I could easily see any one of them starring in their own show. Even his love interest, Shannon, isn't the typical girl next door. Usually in these shows, the main character's crush isn't very interesting. They'll be beautiful and seemingly perfect, always just out of the main character's reach, and something for them to pine for with nothing else quite to them. Where those shows zig, Shannon zags. She's definitely not the conventional beauty. The initial reason Robot Jones is attracted to her is that she has a full headset of braces and a mechanical leg. But we get to see more of her personality through the series. She's friends with Robot Jones, but she can be moody, and fickle, and friendly, and helpful, hormonal, and dorky. A great example is when Robot Jones wants to ask her to a dance, and his friend Socks encourages it, saying she's looking good. And when they look over, milk starts shooting out of her nose. Rather than make her seem unattainable, her flaws showcased throughout the series end up making her more relatable and helps us understand as to why Robot Jones likes her. Even Robot Jones's foils in the show are enjoyable to watch, despite them constantly harassing him. His math teacher, Mr. Mick, is so funny. And before I go on, I have to ask, is the name Mr. Mick spelled MC a math joke? Hear me out. E equals MC squared. So, does MC squared become Mr. Mick? If it's been discovered before, I'm glad I figured it out on my own. If not, I'm a genius. And if it's just a coincidence, refer to my genius comment, because that's too much of a coincidence to be true. But Mr. Mick is a jaded math teacher frustrated with his underachieving class, expertly voiced by Rip Taylor, who, if we're sticking with his cartoon voice acting career, may be most well known for his role as the genie in the DuckTales movie. The head of the school, Principal Madman, is a tragically comic figure, always trying to run his school while punishing Robot Jones any chance he gets because he hates technology. He does have some good intentions though, so he comes across as someone you love to hate. And speaking about hate, the main antagonists of the show are the Yogman twins, and they are grimy, gross, evil, and so good as Robot Jones's enemies. They want to steal his brain and make him their robot slave, and the older Yogman twin may just be the highlight of the show. He's voiced by Josh Peck of Drake and Josh fame, and he's perfect for the role. I mean, his voice makes your skin crawl, and then walk, and then run away, because he is disgusting to listen to. And you can tell the animation team knows how good he is, because they take full advantage of his delivery. Anytime he talks, the words appear on screen, but they do so in a very disturbing way. And they'll zoom up to his face and draw pores and draw tiny hairs sticking out. He just comes off as a devilish figure, and it's always a pleasure and displeasure when he's on screen. Overall, I'd say the strongest aspect of this show is its humor. It's genuinely funny and has a little bit of every kind of comedy, starting with the conflicts. In one episode, Robot Jones and his math teacher, Mr. Mick, get into an argument about who's better at math, and Mr. Mick gets so frustrated, he calls him out for a math challenge, which, instead of trying to figure out a problem on the board like you'd expect, has the entire class chanting math challenge, and a math-themed scavenger hunt ensues. It's a wildly ridiculous and creative situation that you can't help but get sucked into. There's loads of humorous references too, some more subtle than others, which range from a pair of Knight Rider characters to a surprising Evil Dead reference that closely resembles the most disturbing scene from that movie. There's also plenty of irreverent comedy thrown in as well. One of my favorites being a kid who laughs at Robot Jones ends up getting attacked by birds throughout the episode. He has no bearing on the plot and never appears in the show again. It's just a hilarious throw your hands up in the air and say, well, I don't know what that was about, but it sure was funny to hear him scream and suffer moment. So, how could this show, with a unique art style, great characters, and tons of comedy, not succeed? Well, the simple answer would be that since the show didn't initially garner a big audience, it was moved around to different time slots, making a seldom watched show even harder to get eyes on. I can't speak to the reasons why the corporate brain trust moved the show around so much, so I want to talk more about the content viewers may have seen that didn't keep their attention. The first being the name. Whatever Happened to Robot Jones is a terrible name for a show. If I were to hear that show and I didn't know what it was about, I'd think it was about a robot that went missing, or a reboot from a show in the distant past called Robot Jones. And none of those really convey what the show's about. Call it The Misadventures of Robot Jones, or something that even gives a vague impression of what it's going to be about. Without it, it's not as likely to bring in an audience of people who may be on the fence as to whether to watch it or not. Another thing about the show that may have turned people away is the art. Now, I spent a good while in the beginning praising how it looks, and I stand by that. But this show was on during a time where cartoons were starting to skew towards being more action-oriented with adult themes. So when faced with a choice, are young teens more likely to watch a show about a robot middle schooler or something else like Teen Titans or Samurai Jack? Another thing I previously complimented, the voice acting, is a major contention as well, pertaining specifically to Robot Jones. He's originally voiced by the Microsoft Word 98 text-to-speech software, but in Season 2, he's replaced by voice actor Bobby Block, who sounds like a little kid. It's a big difference in how Robot Jones sounds and comes across. With a text-to-speech voice, it gives off more of a robotic impression. So when he doesn't understand something, it gives off more that it's due to his programming. With Bobby Block's voice, it comes off as more of a little kid, so it sounds like human growing pains. I actually enjoyed both voices, but if I'm being realistic, I can see either one of them being grating to the ear. And if one voice doesn't appeal to you, I can imagine the other one is likely to bring you in if you have to listen to it for 22 minutes. So what is this show's legacy? Where does it fall in the grand scheme of time? As I was watching the episodes, I tried to figure out which show it was most similar to, and I think I came up with an answer, albeit an unlikely one. This show reminds me a lot of Peanuts. Yeah, it reminds me of Charlie Brown and his band of friends. Peanuts isn't a show that has a lot of plot. There's inciting incidents, sure, but once they're introduced, the rest of the episode follows how characters deal with them. And that's more or less what Robot Jones does. He suffers from a dearth of familiarity with interpersonal dynamics, and the episodes are him dealing with his own inadequacies and trying to figure out how he can shore them up with the help of his friends. It's an evergreen concept that, while might not ever be beloved at any particular time, does fit perfectly at one point when you decide to watch it. So if you want to give an episode a watch, Cube Wars and The Yogmans Strike Back would be my recommended episodes. But let me know, does it deserve to be as fondly remembered as I make it out to be? Did you watch it and like it? Is Mr. Mick a math joke? Let me know in the comments and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.